not necessarily tribal or regional.
All right, thank you for staying with us. You're watching Daybreak on Trust TV. We'll be taking a look at the dailies on Daybreak now, and we'll begin with the Daily Trust newspaper right away. Now, the first headline there, the lead story says, massive flood looms in states as Cameroon plans to open dam. It has the riders that says Adamawa, Taraba, Kogi, Benue, Nasarawa, Plateau, others at risk. They also have another rider, water volume higher than last year's, says Minister. NEMA tells residents to relocate. All the details on page 4. Above the lead story, you also have NSCIA can unveil code of conduct for clerics, say Nigeria not battleground, on page 8. The next story there, oil theft. Militants, pirates flee as NAF airstrikes hit camps, on page 14. Some more stories. No more debt servicing with scarce revenue, according to the president. You have also, beside the pictorial, Atiku Tinubu tell Nigerians how you got degree without primary, secondary education, on page 13. Katsina, rising bandits attacks worry residents, on page 3. LG Tussle, Plateau Council workers commence indefinite strike over fear of attacks, on page 10. The last story there, intrigues, controversies over Nigeria's foreign reserves. Why did CBN borrow $15 billion? Import capacity under threat. All that on page 25. These are the main stories on the cover page of Daily Trust newspaper this morning.
Let's move on to The Guardian. Taking a look at The Guardian, we have a very interesting infographic there of figures and then different zones around the world. Well, let's take a look at the lead story that says federal government estimate reduces unemployment on paper amid almost 10 million job deficit. That story is on page 10. And above that, we have stories like the controversy over relevance of specialized varsities. That's a news analysis there. You check on page 4 of The Guardian, you get more details. Then Nigeria won't service debt with 90% revenue, Tinubu assures at NBA conference. That story is on page 6. At the bottom strip, we have Atiku ask Tinubu to come clean on academic fit and ingenuity. All right, page 3 has that story. NACAT sues acting CBN governor and deputy CCB over alleged refusal to declare assets. That story is on page 3 in The Guardian newspaper. And Nigeria is still losing 400,000 barrels of crude oil daily. That's coming from Rivado, and that's about the news you can see in front of The Guardian newspaper today, and you get further details when you read between the pages.
All right, let's take a look at the Vanguard newspaper, where you have the lead story there, talking about the flood. It says anxiety in flood-prone states as Cameroon opens Lagdo Dam. Above the masthead, you have other stories there. Supreme Court confirms PSC as body responsible for police recruitment. Oil theft. FG Lords Tantita for pipeline protection. You also have Serap to Tinubu reverse ban on Vanguard, Galaxy TV, 23 others from Aso Rock. Other stories there says government efforts failing as food imports rise 122%. Deficit hits 4.9 trillion naira. 32nd anniversary. Edo, Delta, Bayelsa, Oshun, Abia count blessing. Set future targets. You also have other stories there. Ajagba wins WBC silver heavyweight belt. These are the main stories on the Vanguard newspaper this morning.
And let's take a look at the Punch now. The lead story says Cameroon dam opening, evacuate to prevent deaths. Federal government states warn flood-prone communities. There are writers attached to this story. He says NEMA advises governors on evacuation. Nasarawa Taraba set up IDP camps and others. The other writer attached to the lead story in the Punch newspaper says a number of others evacuation in affected areas and flood sweeps away 2 children. That's a really sad one there. Page 2 and 4 accommodates that story in the Punch newspaper. And then at the top we have on Niger, ECOWAS demand shorter transition period from junta. Page 23 has more details. And then external reserves fall by $950 million after Naira float. Page 21 has more details. And then on cash shortage, bank borrowing from CBN hits 12 trillion Naira. Quite a high number there. Page 10 has more details of that story. And then on servicing debt with 90% revenue, path to destruction, Tinubu tells NBA. Very interesting pictorials from the NBA conference that has been declared open by the president there. And you could see the NBA president and then some other scores of the NBA on the pictorial session there in the front page of the Punch. Then the bottom strip, there are 3 stories there. Let's start with this one that says banks, 18 others fined 125 million naira for late filings. Page 21 has more. And then Senator's aide, murder cases take time to resolve. Please reply family. All right, page 4 and 5. That seems to be an update of a story, a developing story, so to speak. So the last one I'll be taking from the Punch this morning says, I am loyal to Obaseki, still want to be governor. That's coming from Deputy Governor of Edo State, Der Schreiber. Page 27 has more details.
All right. Let's take a look at this day newspaper. The lead story there, it says, Tinubu, Nigeria cannot continue debt servicing with 90% of revenue. You also have above the masthead, at Rwanda retreat, Nigerian governors declare effective leadership in high demand in Africa. Also, you have other stories. That says, Obaseki, our politics must work for the next generation. You have all that interview on page 21 to 23. 5 states mark 32 years, reminisce about journey so far. Well, these are the main stories on this day newspaper this morning.
Okay, let's take a look at some of the main stories on The Nation. On Tinubu, servicing debt with 90% revenue unsustainable. And there's a writer attached to that story. He said, good pay for judges will lift judiciary. That's coming from the president there. He started on the front page. Continue reading on page 5 and The Nation's newspaper. Just above that, we have NEMA alert to flooding over Lagdo Dam opening in Cameroon. All right, you can read further in The Nation's newspaper. And then we have Nigeria loses $4 million daily to oil theft, says NSA. And there are 2 writers attached to the story. One says, siphoning point found in Abia. And then Minister Ok's pipeline protection firm and firm's effort. That's another writer there. You can start reading from the front page, but that story continue on page 4 in The Nation's newspaper. And then let's take this one that says CCB begins verification of governors and ministers' claims. And the writer attached to the story says agency to collaborate with CBN, NFRU, SEC, CAC and others. All right, news is on page 4. Tax reforms aided 10.1 trillion naira revenue collection, says FIRS. Page 4 has that. And then family hopeful on suspended EFCC Bowers release. All right, to give more details in The Nation's newspaper. And let's take a look at some of other stories in The Nation. It says stock market deals up by 22%. And lastly, Indian Prime Minister proposes G20 slot for AU. That story is on page 8. And that's about the stories we'll be taking from the front page of the nation's newspaper this morning.
All right. Well, let's get some perspectives to some of the stories. We have Trust TV's in-house analyst Amina Yuguda with us in the studio to talk to some of these stories here. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us on Daybreak this morning.
My pleasure.
All right.
Nice to be here.
Well, a number of stories, really. The Daily Trust leads with the story that's talking about the flood, the looming flood that is likely to happen at any time. Last year, we saw the devastation that the flood caused in some states in Nigeria as a result of this Lagdo Dam in Cameroon. And now the Cameroonian authorities are warning the Nigerian government and Nigerians generally to take caution because the dam is about to be opened again. So each time the dam is about to be opened, there's usually an announcement to that effect. But yet, when it eventually happens, we see the devastation and impact it causes on people. Nigerians are asked to evacuate, especially those in the flood-prone areas in Adamawa, Taraba, Kogi, Benue, Nasarawa Plateau, and others. But is that enough, really?
So you see, the thing is, with the Lagdo Dam issue, I think it's mostly a problem of, we know that every single year, when the rainy season comes, would usually often have that water overflow from Cameroon, especially, for example, in Adamawa State. There are key areas in communities around that share a border with Cameroon that we know that every time they release water from Lagdo Dam, those communities will be overrun. And I promise you, if you go to those communities again this year, next year, and maybe 5 years to come, there'll still be people living in those settlements. So the problem is with enforcement, because the meteorologists tell us ahead. We have systems to predict weather forecasts and know that every year at a certain period of time, there will be flooding. So why do people keep insisting on going back to those areas? The State Emergency Management Agency and NEMA have to be more hands-on and proactive in terms of making sure that they enforce the resettlement of those people permanently. Because when it becomes dry season again, and they're usually farming communities that go back to those areas, and truly the space of land around that area that's usually affected by flood is usually a swampy area that could be good for rice production. But we need to plan better. So this is something that there has to be a synergy between agencies of government, not just the state government. The state government, yes, they do have the higher authority in terms of being closer to the people and being able to enforce, but we shouldn't go back to the same problem every single year.
But beyond the relocation, I recall that Trust TV ran a documentary on this Lagdo Dam issue, and there's the construction of the Dasing Hausa Dam that was supposed to have been done for decades is still lingering. And the whole idea is, if you have that Dasing Hausa Dam, it's supposed to serve as a buffer dam, so that even if water is released from Cameroon, you know, it gets to absorb the water and all. But it doesn't look like anything has been done in that regard since the last flood in 2022. Preparations will be made, but then after that, nothing happens.
So the Dasing Hausa Dam that you're talking about, I remember it was one of the people who were running, or one of the candidates that was running for governorship. That was one of his key campaign promises, that he would make sure he builds a dam there to enable us exploit the hydroelectric power potential from that dam. It will trickle down in terms of employment opportunities, in terms of us being able to also control the flood disaster. But unfortunately, we know that politicians will just use that as a campaign rhetoric. But when it comes to following through on their promises after they've gotten into office, they forget about it. So I'm really disappointed that the state governor doesn't see that as a potential cash cow for Adamawa State. Because if you're able to exploit hydroelectric power from that place, there will be no problem in terms of power generation for Adamawa State and even neighboring states like maybe Taraba. You could even do a power sharing formula with Cameroon even, because as I'm aware that Niger, buy power from us. So why can't we exploit that also? So it falls down to the lack of a will to enforce policies or to even think outside the box. So most governors are thinking only of, collecting an allocation from the federal government every month instead of focusing on how to generate revenue internally. So that's a big problem. And if we don't, tackle it head on, next year, 5 years to come, the same problem will recur.
Okay.
So when we talk about tackling the problem, I recall that we also did a documentary about a flood in Kogi State and other neighboring villages. Now, this is going to affect Kogi State as speculated by NIMET and other NEMA as well. So when we talk about tackling the issue, we have the federal government who has witnessed some of this flood. In 2013, 2014, we've seen this happen. It was even worse that maybe a lot of people do not know, but 2013, 2014 flood in Lokoja was one of the worst hit. A lot of people were displaced and it lingered for a very, very long time, just like the last one we experienced. So what synergy should be deployed at this moment? Should we be left in the hands of the state government alone? Shouldn't the federal government, work with the state government to make sure that the problem of Kogi State, for instance, be tackled before any of this release of water from the Lagdo Dam?
Yeah, truly, there should be a cooperation between the federal government and the state government. But to be honest, the state government has to take the charge. They're closer to the people. They have, in fact, I do, if I'm correct, land in states within the purview of the state government. And so even if the federal government is coming in to help in terms of the infrastructure, there has to be a cooperation between the state government and the federal government. And so when they have their meetings in Abuja with the federal government, or when they have meetings with their minister in charge of the environment and the minister in charge of water resources. Is it water resources, by the way? I think it's more of an environmental issue.
Yeah, it's
water resources because it has to do with water.
Yes.
So that speaks to the point that it has to be from multiple points. It can't be just one agency of government. It can't be one level of government. It has to be a combined effort to tackle this issue head on. And I think NEMA and SEMA would have the first-hand information, because every year they're usually on the scene to help relocate the victims of the flood, to help them with, palliatives, for example. So they have an idea of what the situation is on the ground. And so they should be tackled with, a synergy and cooperation between multiple government agencies, not just one person. I think it's unfair to wait for the federal government. The state government has to be proactive.
Yes. All right. Well, also another story. It appears that the president is also bothered about, debt servicing amidst scarce revenue. Yesterday, he addressed members of the Nigerian Bar Association, where he said, well, no more debt servicing with scarce revenue. Nigeria's debt to revenue ratio is pegged at about 96%, and a lot of economists and experts and observers really have expressed, their disappointment in this and how unsustainable it is for Nigeria. So if the president is saying this, do you see us matching words with action, really, given the fact that we're already struggling? This is an economy that is struggling, and it looks like to even budget, to have enough budget to run government and to meet other needs, we do not seem to have enough revenue, because the budget deficit is running in trillions. So is it even possible to move ahead or to move forward without borrowing?
So I think, if I'm not mistaken, the current debt profile is about 7 trillion naira. And the economic experts would often tell you that you need debt for government to run effectively. I remember around 2008, when the financial crisis in the global financial downturn, recession that happened, affected America the most, and they were in debt. And I think they still are in debt to China. Yes, debt is a good thing for the economy if serviced appropriately. And so you can't have a deficit whereby you're borrowing more money to maybe fund recurrent expenditure. That's where it doesn't make any sense. And so if you need financing, especially from the international community, you should be focusing it on capital projects. And I think that's something that I know the past administration has gotten a lot of flack for it, but the truth is they were borrowing and were funding capital projects. For example, the rail. So if the money that you're borrowing, you're using it for capital expenditure, things like roads, you're building factories, you're making sure that we have good transportation, especially rail, then it makes some sense. But at some point, we have to cap it. We need to focus on partnerships with international organizations that would be willing to invest in the Nigerian economy. And so things like, I remember we used to have, I don't know how functional it is now, Peugeot Automobile Nigeria. Yes. So we need to bring back manufacturing. Yes. We need to bring back capital projects that will give some kind of respite to our local industries. And so the more that we produce, the better for our economy. It's a no-brainer. There's no other way out of it. You need to have some money to make money. But then we should focus more on the local economy, you know, the value chain for agriculture and capital projects, not recurrent expenditure, not spending on the cost of governance, not hiring more people.
We see a lot of things like this on the papers, but, you know, implementation seems to be a problem. But we won't let go of Daily Trust if we don't talk about this other story that's very, very interesting to me. I mean, the local government tussle in Plateau State. They say Plateau Cancer workers commence indefinite strike over fear of attacks. And let's say Plateau State has been in the news for very interesting reasons, security reasons. We've seen, you know, a lot of things happen with the state government and all of that. What can you make out of this? You know, a lot of crises from Plateau State in recent times. Let's say maybe, you know, in the wake of the new government.
So Plateau State has always been a bit tricky in terms of the demographics of the state, in terms of the ethnic diversity. And of course, I think one of the key issues is the rich and fertile resources in the state. So obviously, whenever there's competition for scarce resources, there would always be, you know, some kind of contestation, so to speak. So it's left for the government, the newly assuming government, to prioritize. You need to first of all sort out the issues with human resources. So the people who feel most exploited would always be the ones who take action against the state. So insecurity, if you don't have security, you cannot tackle all the other issues. Your workers, the workforce, the local government especially, there are a lot of people in many states who rely on the salaries from local government. And if they're not happy, there's no way your state will progress. And so just to continue to be, you know, a tourism capital of Nigeria that, you know, attracts a lot of foreigners, that attracts a lot of businesses because of the very conducive environment. They need to tackle insecurity. They need to make sure their workers are very happy, and also to explore other opportunities to ensure that, you know, people live in peace with each other. So it has to be, I keep saying it's proactive, not reactive, not waiting until there's a crisis to now try and turn the fire out. But you need to, ahead of time, know what the incendiary points are, and to think about ways to capitalize on whatever advantage they have to make sure that the disadvantages do not flare up into crises.
Do you think that, you know, the government is doing enough things, since we still have, you know, some of this news being churned out on a weekly basis, I would say?
Well, I'm not one to bash, you know, governors, because every government has their own. I don't think there's any country in the world where there's no difficulty in handling a large number of people. Crisis is bound to happen. So the way you attack, or you make sure that you are on the ground with boots on the ground to make sure that everything is resolved, that people see that you're making an effort, is what gives them a bit of confidence in your abilities. And I think the governor of Borno State does that so well. You know, so whenever there's a problem, you see him there, if not for anything else, for the fact that he's giving them a listening ear. He's there on the ground, they can see that their governor cares. That helps a lot. So I think the governor has to have a one-on-one conversation with members of his council. He has to go into the local government areas, the crisis-prone local government areas, to make sure he understands the problem, not delegate it to, you know, a local government chairman.
All right, well, another issue that has set tongues wagging in the past few days is the issue of the new method of measuring unemployment rate in Nigeria. So from 33, well, some people say, well, it's not like it's from 32% that it dropped to 4.1%, but there's just a new methodology that was used to arrive at the 4.1%. So the Guardian newspaper is leading with a story that says FG's estimate reduces unemployment on paper amid almost 10 million jobs deficit. So some are really doubtful of the fact that how do you say we have 4.1% unemployment rate, and then when you look around you, out of every 10, you are likely to see perhaps 6 or 7 that are unemployed. So it seems like the data or whatever methodology is not in tandem with the reality on ground. What do you make of this new, figures?
So the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics, well, they're scientists, but they need to come back to reality. It's the same thing with calling Nigeria the largest economy in Africa. We say, oh, Nigeria is the largest economy, but does that really translate into goodwill in terms of economic productivity? We have over 200 million people, right? And well, the potential for it to be
I figure that we were told anyways. The 200, I always challenge this. Till date, we still struggle with data.
Exactly.
The last census we conducted was more than a decade ago. Till date, we haven't seen any. So the 200 million we always quote is also an estimate that was given to us.
So that's what we say over. I said over 200. And if you think about it also, we say, Dangote is the richest man in Nigeria and Africa. But we know that there's a lot of wealth there that is not in the system. So we think that it might be, some other falling through the loops of data and statistics. So the truth is, we need to focus on the life of the average Nigerian and less on the data, because the data doesn't translate to the reality on the ground. Just like when we say, for example, that, we have, there was a time, I remember when we said, the economy is improving, we're doing this, we're doing that. But at the end of the day, how many people are living below poverty lines? How many people can afford to eat 3 square meals every day? That's the statistics. That's the data that we care about the most, not what the scientists in
Isn't there supposed to be a new way of doing this? Because we still keep seeing these data come out from NBS and other relevant agencies, and we keep doubting some of these figures. Isn't a way that it can be done that Nigerians would see the effort
benefit
of this? Yes.
So what I think needs to be done first is for us to have one social security register where everybody is covered. So if you're unemployed, we know that you go to an unemployment office and you get maybe a stipend every month, and then we can calculate how many people no longer take that stipend. That's what's done in most countries of the world, that you have a register, a social register of people who are living below the poverty line and they need aid from the government. If someone said to me, if PHCN, NEPA, know every single house, every single neighborhood, they take bills, especially the places that have no meters. So why can't we have a all-encompassing social register that takes account of the people who are the poorest of the poor, irrespective of whether you have a bank account or not? We need to have data about people who are living in poverty, and that way we can now calculate the deficits when people are either employed or not employed, not a random, I don't know their methodology.
I like this analogy, because after we have NEPA transition into PHCN and now we have AEDC for some states, is, the initial.
So
why can't we have No, in an agency who can get these things right.
So I think the Bureau of Statistics should collaborate with the NIMC, the Identity Management Commission, with the banks, BVN. That way you can get one database of all Nigerians, and even the police also. It doesn't make sense that all the crimes that happen on a daily, we have no way to track people. We have biometrics. Most people have bank accounts with their BVN. So why can we not adequately, even the Ministry of Budget
companies,
of course,
telecoms, because these days, I mean, I wouldn't say everyone 100%, but at least majority of people have mobile phone. It can.
So it's something that all the agencies need to come together and not bicker about, but come to an understanding of how they can promote sharing of information. Because it's very peculiar that in Nigeria, even amongst the security forces, you hear that, oh, the police are fighting with the army, with the FRS, no, what's the other one? Civil defense. Yeah. So they need to cooperate.
And the court had to intervene about who has the right to recruit between the Nigerian police
and
the Police Service Commission.
It doesn't make any sense. It's not about fighting for your own benefit. It's for the greater good of the country. And so if we don't have that synergy, interagency synergy, there's no way we're going to solve this problem.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Amina Yuguda, Trust TV's in-house analyst. We thank you for joining us on Daybreak this morning at the shortest notice to come and share your perspectives.
We appreciate your effort. And this is where we draw the curtains on today's episode of Daybreak. Remember to join us next time at same station, same time. My name is Martia Umar.
And I am Ayuba Ilya. Thank you so much for watching the program. Join us again tomorrow for another time. Bye for now.